Frazier.
We can hear you.
Good.
Great. Rema, can you hear us? No?
So we'll get started in a minute. I'll just briefly introduce folks, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ben and Liz, who are going to be leading. So thank you, everybody, for joining who's here. I'm Scott Goldstein, the Executive Director of EmpowerEd, and unfortunately, with everything that's happened, we didn't have our annual Teacher Voice Summit this year. So over the next several weeks, we're going to be presenting several of the sessions that would have taken place at that summit virtually, and our hope is that we can really have them be interactive conversations. And so we're starting today with the topic of teacher retention, which has always been a front and center issue for us. And I'm going to turn it over to two teacher leaders, Ben Williams of Capital City Public Charter School and Liz Rosenberg at Creative Minds Public Charter School, who are going to lead our session today.
Awesome. So Liz, why don't you kind of get us started with some logistics of how to make this a little more interactive?
All right, just unmuted myself. So before we actually get started, just like quick housekeeping, if you can mute yourself, and Ben and I are going to be taking turns leading what's on the PowerPoint, and the one that is not doing that will be monitoring the chat. So if you have anything that you want to share, that's a great way to do that. And then there'll be an opportunity later for a conversation where we'll all unmute ourselves.
Definitely. And there's also, if you kind of hover over the bottom of your screen, it looks a little differently from me, but you'll see a space that says participants. And so if you click on that, it will actually give you an option to like raise your hand, which should pop up in one of our sidebars. And then we can, you know, if you have an idea or you want to comment on something, we can stop and introduce ideas to the conversation that way. So having said that, I want to talk a little bit. I'll close this for the moment and let Liz manage the chat. But just wanted to talk about the purpose of kind of convening today's conversation. As Scott said, we were looking forward to having this conversation at the Teacher Voice Summit, but obviously given, you know, the pandemic, that's not happening. So we're here to get today, you know, from a variety of different roles because we're concerned about effective teachers leading the classroom, and EmpowerEd has been working on this issue for a little over a year and a half now, and have really been, you know, happy to partner with the state board and other stakeholders to really try and make headway on this. So we want to go over a recent State Board of Education report that's really highlighted and shed a lot of new light on this issue. So thank you, Frazier, for all the work that you've done on this topic so far. And we want to continue to build on that work through conversation today. And then finally, there are a lot of really useful recommendations in the report that we want to spend most of our time today being able to have a conversation around to see how we can best advocate together to make sure that DC schools maintain you know, effective teachers for students and families and for the health of the profession. So having said that, I'll turn it back over to Liz to walk us through our agenda for today.
So this is what we're going to be going through. Like Ben said, we'll talk about the key findings from the report from the State Board of Education. There are some great recommendations of next steps, and then that's where we want to hear from you, what your ideas are, your thoughts, your reactions to those recommendations. We have been working on an initiative to try to work on improving teacher retention, something that we're calling floating professional development, which we will explain, and we would love your ideas and feedback on that. And then finally, we'll go through an exit survey to talk about reflections and next steps for all of us as advocates in this.
Great. So I will hover. So I want to start off by kind of just going over some key takeaways from the State Board of Education report, which was published in February, and really provided a lot of useful data of firsthand experience of teachers sharing their voices in which they hadn't had the outlet to kind of be able to share about their experiences previously. So there were four main drivers that the report highlighted that influenced turnover in DC. So the first was the lack of positive relationships with administrators, and we'll get into that and what that looks like here a little bit. The other thing was a culture created by the evaluation system. So I am in a charter school. I don't necessarily teach under the impact system, but a lot of the teachers in the system felt very frustrated and scared by the impact system. They felt that impact was impacting them out of teaching in the profession. And they felt that the two purposes of the evaluation system, such as being able to provide teachers with clear feedback, and being able to help them to be able to craft a plan to be able to get better and improve their craft, were not being met. So there was a very big gap between kind of the stated purposes and theory of the evaluation system and then the reality that teachers were experiencing, and the stress that it was creating, particularly amongst newer teachers. So the final particular issue area, if you will, that we'll talk about related to turnover today is the lack of teacher voice in decision making. And that was highlighted in particular with regards to safety concerns. Teachers not feeling that there are security measures in place for when things happen. And we'll delve into that deeper here later on. The report also highlighted that there was a secondary bucket of findings that was greatly contributing to quality teachers leaving the classroom. And that was particularly based on a lack of work-life balance and high workloads, which was leading to burnout, which I imagine a lot of teachers have felt in some degree or another. And teachers and good teachers were therefore resigning and quitting, as opposed to not being asked back.
So the next piece that we're going to talk about, the report had some really interesting myth-busting aspects. There are some misconceptions about why teachers are leaving, some of which you may have heard discussed in your networks before. The first one, we know DC is a transient place compared to other places in the country because of politics, perhaps because we are close to other states, but turnover is not higher in DC because of that transience. So that's an argument that has been made a lot. This report has shown that that is not the case. And the other one is that there's been an argument made before that teachers who are leaving are the ineffective teachers, whether that's how we're evaluating them through impact or some other evaluation system. The bad teachers are the ones that are leaving. That was not what this report found. Many teachers were leaving for the reasons that Ben just highlighted, and they were scored as highly effective. So it's not just weeding out the ineffective teachers, it's really affecting teachers of all skill sets, and how they're evaluated on their evaluations.
So I don't know how to move the bar at the top, if you'll bear with me, but I want to briefly kind of go through each issue area one at a time and really be able to kind of move a little faster to be able to spend most of our time together as discussion. So if you have something that you feel is relevant to each issue area as I'm talking, feel free to drop a comment in the chat or to click raise hand. I can only see 5 people at a time, so I'm not sure I'll be able to see everyone, but feel free to speak up if there's something you want to talk about, because the majority of this is brainstorming solutions around these recommendations. So the first issue area is recommendations to improve impact, and focusing first on the evaluation system. And some of the policies that the state board highlighted that would be useful is having evaluators that have experience and knowledge of the coursework. So for instance, there was a teacher in the report who highlighted that she was a reading specialist, and when she was being evaluated in impact, it was being done by someone who only had experience teaching math. And there wasn't necessarily an alignment of what quality instruction looked like for being able to teach reading well. Another thing that we think could improve impact, again, working within the system, is for evaluators to be external individuals who are not tied to the biases of the administration, trying to take some of the politics out of the system and allowing for teachers to get quality feedback, and not necessarily have their scores tied to their relationship with their principal. The third thing related to impact were classroom situations and student challenges that should be understood prior to the evaluation system. So for instance, a student in an elementary school setting who kind of needs to stand or is a little extra talkative, or someone who has a plan to be able to take a break and is not actually missing instruction, but is simply kind of advocating for themselves. So different situations like those were often viewed very punitively, and teachers were therefore docked on their impact score and were receiving lower ratings based on their evaluation and student test scores. And those types of things that didn't take into account the understanding of the context were having very big mental health impacts on a lot of teachers and creating a very stressful environment for teachers. So we'll come back around to these for discussion, but I'm going to move into the second issue area. So the second issue area is around recommendations to improve the teacher-administrator relationships. So, and having said that, there needed to be, and the report did a great job highlighting that there needs to be better security and safety protocols and guidelines for teachers to handle difficult situations. So for instance, there was one teacher who talked about how they had been rated very effective at the 12th grade setting, and without notice, because they thought that the principal didn't like them for whatever reason, was moved to teach 9th grade instead of 12th grade without any conversation and without any say, and therefore was, watched more closely and engaged in a lot more negative interaction with administration, which led to them subsequently choosing not to continue back at the school. And there wasn't any clear guidance as to what they should do, and a lot of teachers in this part of the report highlighted that there are a lot of guidelines around what not to do, but not what to do, and also a lot of frustration with the Washington Teachers Union in being able to really advocate for them quick enough and in a timely manner that's able to get the outcomes that they wanted to see. So another thing here, and this is where EmpowerEd is so critical, is that we really believe that the relational trust between teachers and other teachers in the building, teachers and administrators, is critical to building the types of cultures that allow for safety and improvement and professionalism to take place. So we've actually have a couple pilot schools that we're working with this year to engage on improving relational trust and adult culture. And it's somewhere where we're also interested in hearing people's ideas in just a moment as to how we can actually go about improving this critical factor, which is causing an exodus of good teachers. So the final issue that we'll talk about just before delving into discussion is recommendations to improve safety and security. So the report highlighted that tenured teachers in particular, teachers who have long, 10, 15, 20 years of experience and have really been able to see changes in the district schools, noted that there's been way more behavioral issues over the last 5 years in particular. And that there's the misbehavior, violence towards teachers, bullying and discipline issues not getting addressed has really created a toll on teachers' mental health and safety to the point where they're choosing not to come back. There was one teacher in the report who highlighted that she had been physically assaulted by a student, had gone to take care of, her experience, and which required hospital attention, came back to the school, and even after advocating for herself, the student was still placed right back in her class. So there were no adjustments and a lack of responsiveness from administrators in really taking teacher concerns seriously. And one of the main factors too that was driving this decision was the pressure that schools feel to keep their suspension rates low. So a lot of severe misbehaviors by students that would normally require more direct interventions, because of the pressures that are on principals to minimize suspension rates, were not necessarily being viewed as in a serious light, and therefore were not being addressed adequately, or fell on the teacher to be able to create different discipline policies that we're able to create safety or manage the current circumstances. So the policies here that are really able to, I think, address a lot of these security and safety concerns are making sure that schools have adequate and supportive social workers and mental health services, making sure that mental health services are available to educators and students alike, and that schools are not strapped for inadequate ways of dealing with support services around mental health. And then also clearer policies and stronger school-based policies to protect students and teachers alike from violence. As educators, I'm sure we know the importance of safety and as a baseline for allowing for learning to take place. And that this report really highlighted that in a lot of schools that is sadly lacking. So having kind of gone through some of that and having some experts from different policy areas, OSSI, the foundations, a lot of classroom teachers as experts too, I want to turn it back to Liz to help start us off with our discussion.
So yeah, we would love to hear from you. Anything that jumps out to you. These are the guiding questions that we came up with to guide our discussion, but really any initial reactions or thoughts we would love to hear. So which recommendations resonate the most with you and why? What do you think is necessary to implement one or all of these recommendations? And have you seen any of these implemented effectively in your school or in another school? We'd love to hear more about it. Make sure you unmute first.
And we are happy to kind of take this in whatever direction people want to go. So we do not need to talk first like about evaluation and then relationships and safety and security. Really, whatever people feel like is most useful for EmpowerEd's work and our collective work well.
And since Representative O'Leary from the State Board is here, just wanted to ask too if there's anything, Fraser, that you want to share about the report that wasn't covered yet. Fraser, are you there?
I put on my mute button like you told me to. I just wanted to give a little bit of information about the teachers who were surveyed. We sent the survey to over 2,000 teachers, and we got responses from over 400 teachers, which, according to the surveyor, was a good number to work with. But the things that jumped out at me reading the survey, which was about 180 pages long, was one of the biggest problems is the lack of a positive relationship between the administration and the teachers. Now that carries over into impact, it carries over into safety, it carries over into, and I think that the lack of mentorship and the lack of professional development, especially for new teachers, is one of the things that has to be changed in order to stop the tide of teachers leaving, because we had about a quarter of the teachers leave. And there are reasons why teachers leave, personal reasons, advancement and everything, but really what stuck out in the survey was that almost every one of the teachers who were surveyed who had left wanted to stay and loved teaching. And they left because they weren't getting support. And I think one thing in the back of our heads we need to think about is it's not just the teachers who are impacted. The principals and assistant principals are impacted too. And their tenure is a lot less than our tenure as teachers. You know, I'm a outlier, obviously. I taught for 47 years. I never wanted to leave, never thought about it at all. But the reason that there were hardly the numbers of teachers who left who had taught more than 10 years was really, really low. Most of the teachers who answered the survey had taught less than 5 years. And that's a huge problem. And I think that what I'm going to be working on with the State Board of Education is trying to convince the school systems, both the charter and the public schools, how important it is for young teachers to have mentors and to have valid professional development. Because I don't know how y'all feel, but I know I hardly ever went to a professional development that did anything to change my way of teaching. I'll stop on that.
Yes, and jumping ahead a little bit into the floating PD idea that we had, that certainly highlights on allowing teachers to have professional development that feels like quality, that feels differentiated, that feels like teachers have a buy-in into what they're doing rather than being plopped down and forced to listen to a presentation that may or may not be applicable to them. So I'm curious, the teachers or even administrators in the room, so to speak, what resonates with you being on the front lines, maybe any DCPS teachers that have experienced impact. We'd just love to hear from you.
So I've been in DC, teaching in DC for 10 years now. So I've been with Impact for 10 years. In the beginning, they did have that outside evaluator, the master educator they called them. And I can see why it was a good idea in theory. But there were also flaws with a master educator who doesn't know you, doesn't know your classroom. They don't know, what happened 5 minutes before. So I've gone back and forth with just having the principal. I can see why some people would feel like, oh, they're biased, and then you don't get a fair evaluation. But also master educators, really, I've heard more people have not great experience with that outside evaluator coming in. So, I mean, Impact, they've definitely tried to, I'd say they have improved it actually in the 10 years that I've been in DCPS, Impact has improved. One thing that they did do, I don't know if they still do, is that you can provide context, at least when there were master educators. And that was a new development that last year that master educators were there. You could provide context for your classroom. And you could say, these are, this is what we were doing. These are the kids in my class. And I thought that was helpful. But yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons to having that outside evaluator. But yeah, and I think as far as professional development, I wholeheartedly agree that professional development in my 10 years, I don't think I've participated in any that I was like, oh, wow, that just changed my life. And I think that as we differentiate for students, professional development should be differentiated for teachers as well. And then recommendations for safety. I've definitely, not personally, but I had a friend who was verbally assaulted by a parent, in front of the class, and the administration didn't do anything. And my friend was actually ended up in a psychiatric ward because she was so traumatized and she didn't have any support. And then she was forced to go back to that same school. And it's just devastating because she's an amazing teacher and she had to go back to where she was traumatized and the administration didn't help her or support her. And that kid remained in her class. She's no longer at that school now, but that resonated a lot with me. There has to be a way for teachers to feel safe and supported. I just rambled.
That's a lot. I mean, it's heavy, but thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, I think your point about impact is interesting in that, like, if it's someone internal, there are going to be conflicts. If it's someone external, there are going to be conflicts. I do think allowing teachers to give context reminds us that we're full human beings with a full class of small human beings. And you said that it has improved over your 10 years. Like, what's changed for you?
Well, I think even at my so I'm at a different school. As impact progressed, it did feel more of a conversation and more of a feedback session, and less of a got you sort of situation. When it first started, it was kind of like, it felt very, very stressful. But then as it progressed, I felt like the feedback from administration as well as master educators was more actionable and helpful. So I may be one of the only people who have had positive experiences with it, but I do feel like the feedback I've gotten was helpful. There was a time where I teach pre-K and we are supposed to have another adult in the room. There was a time where a master educator came and observed me when I was by myself. My aide was out that day and she would not come back and do another one. And I was like, but this is not a typical, and her recommendations were like, you and your aide should do this. I'm like, well, how can you tell me to do something? She wasn't here that day. So that was a major flaw in the system. But I think it's improved, and I think at least definitely in my new school, the goal is growth and feedback. And actually, sorry, I'm talking so much. One of the things that my new school does is they will everyone can request an informal observation and talk about what they want to focus on. And the same administrator who will do the impact comes in and does an informal, and they give suggestions and ideas. And so it's like, then the next time they come in, when it's impact, you've already had the experience, they've already given suggestions, you can actually learn and grow from it. So I think perhaps everybody getting an informal part would be helpful. That's just one idea.
Yeah, that's a good insight.
Thank you. We have one hand raised, so I'm going to unmute that individual. I don't see a name, but it's someone from Aussie. Feel free to let us know what you were thinking.
That's me. This is Santiago from Aussie. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I work at Aussie now, but I was a classroom teacher. I was back in Mexico, and I really understand this evaluation process, especially with somebody either internal or external are coming to your classroom once a year or twice a year and telling you how good or how bad teacher are you. So it's not really comfortable. And something when I came to this position, which I prepare professional development for teachers, I understand that in my position, it's very difficult to really know what's happening in the school every day. And the first approach was to create this link or partnership when evaluation is separated from coaching and feedback. So we are trying to shift that mindset and possibly encourage LEAs or administrators on this school level to have something to support the teachers before the instruction, during the instruction. Feel free to risk trying new things, new tools or whatever that may help them to feel more comfortable experimenting, trying, or even co-teaching or collaborating in instruction to make them feel more safe after and before an evaluation. So I think that feedback and that preparation is important. We just have one first round of coaching sessions with 8 dual language schools here in DC. And I'm not gonna lie, I mean, the idea is really good, but it's really just the beginning. Like some teachers are receiving that information. Some schools have instructional coaches that are able to be in touch with teachers at that level. But I think that might have one of the supports that teachers may have to don't feel that judgment from impact, because evaluations are evaluations, and I'm not going to say if I agree or disagree, but I think what makes the difference is if there's system supports before and after the evaluation to help you to improve your practice and your teaching, which is actually something that teachers really appreciate, other than giving them a score and a low note or high note. That's it.
Thank you. We had another hand that was raised, so you are
Lorna.
unmuted.
I lost my screen, guys. I can't see you, but I just wanted to address Fraser's comment about his professional development not making a difference in the way he taught and in the classroom. That sent chills down my spine, because the whole meaning and purpose behind professional development is to improve instructional practices. And so if you think that you look at professional development and how it should link to the curriculum should link to the instruction should link to the assessments, and all of the assessments should be related, especially to the testing grades, what's happening, at the end of the year when it's time for the students to take the test, not necessarily teaching to the test, but making sure that students are equipped and prepared holistically for life and for the assessments that they take. So I just wanted to address that. I'm not familiar with the impact observation, because I'm new to, coming back into the country from overseas working. But as far as professional development, it has to align with what we're doing inside the classroom to improve practices. And that's all I had to say.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
There's so much more to dive into, but just in the interest of time, Ben, if you can move to the next slide.
Yep.
So going off exactly what you were saying, Lorna, one of the initiatives that we've been working on this year with our EmpowerEd group is this idea of floating PD. So like we've talked about, often teachers they're sat down in a room, they're presented a PowerPoint. It doesn't necessarily connect with their skill set or just what they're working on for whatever reason. We expect teachers to be differentiating for kids, and often PD is not very differentiated for us. That's something I'm saying from my anecdotal experience, but definitely something that I've heard from other teachers before. So this idea is allowing teachers to go into other classrooms. They are self-selecting the skills that they want to work on. We will match them with teachers who are opening their door to other people just to come observe. There's no feedback. Someone who feels really strong in that area. So for example, if you are a teacher that is not super comfortable with guided reading, you've had professional development, a lot of us just need to see it in action to really understand it. You would use hours during the school day to go to another school or potentially another classroom in your building and observe a teacher doing guided reading who is strong, self-identified as strong in guided reading. Right now, DCPS, that is in talks with your union for contracts for next year. For charter schools, this is one of the main reasons we wanted to have as many charter teachers here as possible, because we need you, the teachers, to go to your administrators or admin that are on here at charter schools to get buy-in so that we can pilot this. The idea is that we as teachers or professionals, we are experts on many things, but especially our own learning. We know what we need to do next quite often and just don't have the resources to do it. So the idea is you would think about your own growth. It could be content-based, like it could be guided reading or foundations, or it could be something like I'm in a co-teaching model and I don't really know how to do it, and I want to see it in action with a team that's strong. So really the options of what can be identified as what you're looking for, there's no real restrictions on that, but we just want to connect teachers, build our community so that we are outside of our siloed areas. So as of now, what it looks like is we are trying to get charter schools to commit to this for next year. In DCPS, it would be 12 hours for the entire school year, where you can choose, just like you would PTO, you can choose to take off 2 hours in the morning and go see another classroom. In charter schools, what we were thinking is often charter schedules are different than DCPS. So for example, my school might be closed or open the day that yours is the opposite. So using a PD day when there aren't students and teachers going to visit other classrooms, perhaps for the morning, coming back and reflecting with their teams in the afternoon of what they saw, that would allow admin to not have to plan PD, first of all, for those hours that we're out of the building. It would allow admin to do more big picture projects because they won't have to plan for those PDs and they won't have teachers in the building. But we really just want to throw this idea out. We're hoping that it will really stick and we will be able to make a huge difference, because we know from this report and from anecdotal experience, when teachers feel like they have a voice in what's going on in the building in their own learning, they are more likely to stay and they're more likely to be invested. So this is where we'd like to hear more from you. We'd love feedback, ideas, what you think about this and how we might get it on the ground running for next school year.
So I'm just going to unmute like one person at a time based on whose hands I see raised. I'm
raising mine.
All right. Fraser, we can come to you next. I think, I don't want to mispronounce your name, S-Y-B-I-L. Go for it. Sybil. What are your thoughts?
I work in a charter school as well. I love the idea of floating PD. It's something that my school has been talking about. The problem is that it's agreed upon in the spring, and then something always comes up. And so what I want my administration to know is that there will always be something that comes up. Always. That's what happens. Look at this year, for example. So we still have to commit. I have residents, student teachers that stay with me for an entire their classrooms as well. And the other thing that my school, they pride themselves on their PD, and it's not great. But when it is great, it's because it's delivered by teachers. A day is set aside where you can move from one classroom to the next and learn something from that particular teacher. This would also be a great way with floating PD to have teachers come back and share what they've seen in other schools or in other classrooms and ways to do it. So I'm just giving a thumbs up to floating PD. And I wanted to say one other thing really quickly about the teacher administrator relationship. I think it's really tough, and I think one of the biggest struggles is that we're sort of putting this on teachers to mend that, when in fact I think administrators have got to find support in some kind of way, so that they are relieving whatever pressure they're bringing into the jobs, that they are comfortable and secure in their jobs, and so that's not sort of filtering down. It is hard to build relationships with administrators who aren't comfortable in their positions and who aren't secure in their positions for whatever reason. Maybe they're new, whatever the case is. But I wanted that entire burden on teachers to figure that out. Okay, that's my speech.
Thank you, Sybil. Fraser, I want to turn it over to you and then come to Christine.
Okay, I just wanted to mention a couple of things about PD. I'm in all of my years, I'm on the college board. I do PD for AP. I've done it for 20 years, and I love doing it. But it's all specific. And the problem that I saw with the PD that we get through LEAP, especially because LEAP is relatively new now, was that it never really had anything to do with what teachers were doing. When we finally if we got English teachers together and they were talking about English, that was really effective PD. But if we got stuff that was sent down from someplace else, then the PD was just boring PD. And that's why I think it's so important that when I think it was Sybil was just talking about, going from classroom to classroom and teachers were presenting PD to other teachers. That's fascinating. And it crosses genres. I mean, if I learned a lot in a PD that was given by a math teacher, and I don't know anything about math, but I learned a lot about it from that PD. So I think that what we need is that we need to have effective PD. That's it.
Thank you. Christine?
Yes.
Or Kristen, sorry.
Oh, Kristen.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So I am actually the district course chair for probability and statistics for DCPS and the PD. So that's my role, has been to lead the PDs on the PD day. And it's really hard because trying to figure out what all these teachers need to hear, throughout the entire district is really tough. And what I found definitely from my own practice was those visits to other schools. I actually ended up, even though I teach high school seniors, I ended up visiting a 5th grade math classroom and got an absolute ton of ideas that I've been able to implement with my high school seniors. So that floating PD idea was really great. But the only way that it worked was because my administrator knew that teacher and was advocating for me to take that time and got me the sub. And my AP was the driver behind making that work. It wouldn't have worked without his support. And so having been on both sides, I think it's really important to allow those to occur. I think though that one of the things that happens too is we're so feeling like we have so much content to get through that I know I was really worried about taking that day off when we were still worried about park testing. And oh my God, what are my kids? I'm missing an entire day of content because we don't have high quality substitutes, right? If a sub comes in, they're just not learning. And so figuring out a way to balance that so that we're not feeling as pressured that where we can't even take that time to go visit, I think would be really important.
Thank you. I see a couple other hand raises, but I'm curious if we have any principals or assistant principals or instructional coaches who could maybe speak to this idea of what, how buy-in could towards floating professional development could look in your setting. Any? I'm looking for hand raise.
Do we still have, I know we had a couple principals at the beginning, or school directors, if they're still on.
So this is Lorna. My hand is raised. I didn't lower it. Sorry. But I want to address that. I can address that. I think that if there is a mutual understanding of what will be taken away from the floating PD, is there a specific observation form or whatever it is that the teacher is looking to see? If like Liz mentioned, differentiated PD, as a community of practice with a co-teaching model, for example, what are you going to take away from that co-teaching model? Is there a specific form that is going to be filled out? Who will you, report back to about what you learned, whether it's one of your colleagues or if it's the administration? So it's almost like bringing that information back so that at least you can articulate it. And just like we want the kids to do, we want the kids to kind of process it. And so what's on the other side of just going to see what somebody else is doing in their classroom?
Yeah, I want to comment briefly on that and then turn it over to Christine. So I think I totally agree with you that it needs to kind of be purposeful, and we're thinking through the ideas of how to make teachers and schools aware of what other teachers and schools are doing well, and also to try and identify who is willing to kind of take on a mentor role in an organic way. As one of the benefits of it is it really allows these relationships and growth to grow organically. So for instance, at Capital City, we have two particular practices which are awesome, where teachers get to choose their focus for professional development, and then we end up working on that in small groups throughout the year, and then present to other teachers at the end of the school year to be able to grow our practice together. And then there's a whole school practice that we do, which would be great to bring other teachers into as well, around like the Hockman method for teaching writing, and really helping to build both expository and argumentative writing skills, but at a sentence and paragraph level. So I think it's just, there's a lot of resources that feel untapped in some ways, and that's one of, I think, the main benefits of this. So having said that, I want to turn it over to Christine.
Yes, I agree about the floating PD and being able to see teachers in real time. At my new school, my principal is a big advocate of that. So I've gotten to see teachers at other schools in the district, but also teachers within the school. And he does a lot of teacher-led PD, and that's been super beneficial. And the staff professional development that is school-based is so much more important and so much more helpful than any district PD. And so my principal has really been prioritizing school-based professional development and really learning from each other. And I think that those have been tremendously helpful.
I know Ruth is here, and you had something you wanted to say. If we can turn it over to her, Ben.
Definitely. Ruth, you're unmuted. So I've clicked on mute. You need to, I think, also click on mute on your screen.
Can you hear me?
We can.
All right. I'm getting good at this. Okay. That's all relative. But this is great. I tried to get on earlier and I failed, but here I am. What I really wanted to raise, I've been listening to this, it's great. What I wanted to just raise with people is, I mean, have people read through the whole thing? Oh, like it's, I don't know, hundreds of pages? And I guess there's not a real, anyway, it's so, when I read through it, it was so intense. The comments, the comments that were made in the focus groups, the comments that were made, it is so intense. And I feel like people need to understand this and see this and know this. Now, we've had various conversations at the board, and I think Alex is on the phone who's working on this at the board, about how to promote this and get this out and let people understand what's in there. Needless to say, whatever good plans we had are somewhat derailed by Corona. So I don't know even how we're gonna really try to push this out. We're rethinking that, but I just wanna encourage you, anybody who hasn't, to really read through it closely, and those of you who have, to think additionally about how to push out parts of it. And also, let me just say, you guys are the only ones that have really pushed out any of this. Part of the reason is our official release of it was last night, I guess, but then we couldn't have the meeting, and so we put it all off. We have not, quote, officially released it. It's because of the nature of the way we're a public body, and we put things on our website and we review them before they get adopted. It's on our website, it's public, but we haven't done anything around it, as you might have noted. And I talked to Scott, even when you guys put out that first initial long set of tweets on it, I didn't even retweet it. And that was why. So we're gonna have to revisit how we're gonna do this, but I appreciate that you got it out, and we're gonna all have to figure out how to get it out more. We don't exactly have a plan at this moment, but read it, it's amazing. And it's I don't think most people thought that when we did this, that the DCPS, the #1 reason for leaving would be impact. I think that was pretty amazing. Yeah, pretty amazing. And then to look at both the charter school comments and the DCPS comments on the conditions and how those drove people out. I think the specifics are, will get attention. We can get them to people.
Thank you, Ruth. I see maybe if there's any kind of last comment, feel free to add any final thoughts. We do have some general next steps, and I just dropped a link for our exit survey around kind of how we can be involved in this work moving forward and what kind of feels manageable for people in our collective advocacy, whether it be, you know, at your school with a couple colleagues or, you know, in a more public forum as well. So we really want to make sure that we're continuing to grow the awareness of this report and make sure that people know about it, as well as building buy-in, not just within DCPS, but also within particular LEA charter schools for the floating PD idea moving forward. So I'm
just going to encourage, as people, if folks can click on that exit survey before they leave the call over the next 5 minutes while folks make their final comments, I'd love everyone to complete the exit survey while we're still on the line, so we can just share. It's very short, so we can just share in 5 minutes what folks have said and finalize those next steps. And I just wanted to call out one other thing, and thanks Ben and Liz for their leadership on this, and the others in our teacher retention group. There's a lot of ways we can do floating professional development, and the schools can really adapt it, right? So, you know, we can do it with a number of hours. It can be done on Professional Development Day, but there was a Google Doc that Ben dropped into the chat a little earlier that kind of takes step by step how you might be able to implement this. And we have more resources we've developed over the last couple of years on how to do kind of teacher-led professional development. So we'll work with any of you who want to start implementing this. So maybe as folks do their final few comments, if everyone can fill out the exit survey, and we'll hear from a few more people.
And I'll add too, I think for me, this hour went by really fast. So if you did not get to share anything and it doesn't make its way into the exit survey, in that other Google Doc that Ben dropped with the one pager on the floating PD, our emails are at the bottom. So if there's any questions or comments that you have that you think of later, we'd really love to hear from you.
This is Frazier. I want to thank all of you, and we need your help in having a revolution in education in DC, and it's got to come from teachers.
So we're starting to have responses come in. If you can keep filling them out, we got one already. And I know there were some actions we put on here before about testifying. Obviously, those kinds of things aren't happening right now. But if you fill out what kinds of actions you'd like to take, we'll be in touch with how we can be creative to do all those things and get your voices out in this time. There's a lot of ways through writing, through talking to elected officials, working with our state board partners. We can still develop this work, and especially working with folks at your school to try to implement this. Anyone else want a couple more comments before we wrap up?
I just want to say that I think I was initially a little skeptical of just kind of how my instructional coach might view this idea. And after having that conversation, I was so reassured by this really being a partnership that can kind of go both ways in not only allowing our school to grow and teachers to advocate for what they need in their place in their profession and kind of what their needs are, but also vice versa. So I think that once I was able to kind of have that conversation and see that buy-in, it was also a great way to be able to build trust and build the relationship with my administrators.
All right, if there's no one else, I guess we can wrap up. Please take that survey before you go. and log off for the night. And we're going to have more of these. We have another one coming up on teacher diversity sometime, maybe a couple weeks from now. We're going to have another one on budget equity in the district. And finally on culturally responsive teaching. So we'll let you all know about the schedule for the ones that are coming. Upset that we couldn't have our summit and see everybody in person, but it's really great. I know we're all getting a little tired of video conferencing already, but